So thank you everyone for coming. This is the BlueYard space, as you could probably tell by that beautiful wall monument over there. We at BlueYard are a deep tech and Web3 fund, but we have a lot of other things that we care about, and so this was really important to me. I'm one of the investors on the team for a few different reasons, but I made the move over to Berlin about a year and a half ago, and really saw a lot of our portfolio companies being on like kind of one or the other end of the spectrum. The first end was they had kind of absolutely no understanding of how regulation was going to affect them, or the other side, which is that they had a little bit of knowledge, but they didn't know the implications of said knowledge into their day-to-day in the protocol building. And I think that us as VCs, we take quite a lot of risk, and that's kind of our intention, but unnecessary risk seems, self-explanatorily unnecessary. So I think it would be a really great, I thought it would be a really great kind of first starting point for us to at the very least like understand where we are coming from a policy perspective, but then also from the protocol side, and just kind of understand where the goals are overlapping. So we'll facilitate a little bit of a workshop a little bit later, but thanks so much for coming. Shelby.
Great. So yeah, I'm Shelby. I am working with Radicle, but I actually used to previously be at BlueYard. Radicle is a decentralized code collaboration platform built on open protocols. The project itself is in the process of transitioning to a DAO, and I am the governance facilitator for that DAO governance process. And yeah, I am here today primarily because in my experience with recently being a policy student, the frustration with the lack of interest and kind of almost blatant dismissal of academics and policymakers for Web3 and blockchain and crypto in general. And I think it's really important to kind of start having these conversations a bit more intimately with a lot of different folks from a lot of different backgrounds, so that we can, try to find better solutions that work for everyone. Mr. Florian here actually made a really good point that kind of really kickstarted this whole idea for me during his presentation at Shelling Point in Amsterdam a few months ago, saying that people in Web3 can't just keep yelling at policymakers and saying they're doing a bad job, but not offer actual viable alternative solutions. So yeah, this is kind of like the starting discussion. We thought could be a starting discussion for us to kind of start thinking about understanding both sides of what their goals are and their incentives that they're working with, and then maybe even come up with some solutions. So
yeah. This is a little bit of an appetizer.
Workshop.
Yeah, we'll start with the lightning talks. They'll be about 10 minutes each. We'll have a Q&A at the very, very end, so please hold all your questions. And then after that, we'll have a little bit more announcements about how the workshop will work. But first up is Trent.
So great to be here, everyone. Great to be at a BlueYard event again, now that we're past coronavirus. Yes, and so I'll start with a question. If there could be an objective function for society, what might that be? And there's lots of things, right? Like end human suffering, eliminate disease, all that. And I like to point back to Maslow's hierarchy, old model. At the very bottom, it's like you get past your basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, water. And then you have education and better health, and all the way up to the very top, it's self-actualization. So wouldn't it be amazing if every single human on the planet could self-actualize, right? And what does that mean? It's whatever you want it to be. It's chase your dreams. If you want to write the great American novel or great German novel, great. If you want to play video games in your mother's basement, great. If you want to, create the world's greatest protocol, great, right? So that, to me, is a pretty good proxy for an objective function for the world, which simply every single human has an opportunity to self-actualize. And so I wanted to start with the goal because I think we always should know what it is that we're trying to aim for ultimately. Otherwise, how will we ever get there, right? And so that's one way. And of course, it's not just self-actualize. You have to have your basic needs met, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You build up, right? And it's not going to go from 0 to 100%. We want to, go through everything. Eventually, maybe 100% of the top, and that would be ideal. But who knows? So that's sort of the carrot way of framing this, the towards. The away way of framing this is to not have horrible things happen in the world, right? And because the world has its challenges, climate change, of course. The water is going to come. For those of you who know, I sometimes talk some people's ear off. Did you know the whole bottom third of Florida is going to be underwater in a few decades? They have flooding now, yet Miami real estate is higher than ever. Miami is going to be underwater, $700 billion worth of real estate. And it's not just Miami, right? Most of Amsterdam and most of Netherlands is underwater. And yes, they could engineer their way out, but will they have the money to do it? So they might go broke trying. That's the problem, right? And there's 50 other cities in the world, major cities, that have huge problems. So the water's going to come right now. Assuming the world, assuming we don't solve it, and that's a big question. But it's not just the water will come, the heat will come. You know, we've seen heat waves in India in the last month or two, where it was hitting 45 degrees in highly humid settings, where people were literally dropping dead from the heat. And it's literally straight out of the pages of a sci-fi novel that came out a few years ago from a famous author. It's quite sad. So the heat is going to come. And not just in India, in all of the Middle East. Super rich countries like Dubai and Saudi Arabia, this is going to happen there. And interestingly, the cold will come too. We are lucky here in Europe. We are at the same latitude as the middle of Canada, where I'm come from, where it's 40 below in the winter. We're exactly the same latitude here in Berlin. Why don't we have 40 below in the winter? Because we have the Gulf Stream. It's heat that comes from the south, South America, comes up across the Atlantic Ocean and warms us. That's going to go away in the next 2 to 20 years. Scientists aren't quite sure when, but the cold will come. So the world has problems. So there's the towards framing. What is it that we want? Self-actualization. But we've also got big challenges, right? The climate change, as well as, you know, all this printing money for coronavirus and all that with inefficient capital allocation for this is leading to inflation. High inflation for a few years means that a lot of the middle and blue-collar workers can't feed their families anymore, right? So that leads to risk of civil unrest and civil war even potentially, right? So, you know, we haven't seen major wars for decades and decades, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen, right? So these are worries, and I really, truly worry about this. But myself, I worry, but I also don't just complain. I always come with solutions. I'm a builder, I'm a thinker, and I like to execute. So in my career, I've spent a lot of time, my first 20 years, as I was getting going in my career, I loved AI, I still love AI. So I spent time helping to build software to design computer chips. And ultimately, I kind of hit one of my dreams, which was helping to make a dent in Moore's Law itself. And I'm very proud of that work. And Moore's Law itself is sort of this backbone for civilization to make progress, to help with things like climate change and self-actualization. Great. Since 2013, so almost 10 years, I've actually been working on blockchain full time. First building on Bitcoin with basically an NFT platform way long ago now, ancient history. And then BigChainDB and more recently Ocean, which is all about leveling the playing field for data. For especially the monetization of data and so on. So really trying to help make a difference such that we can have a brighter future. And for my children too, I ask myself, okay, you know, what can I do to help my children, my 8-year-old and my 2 9-year-olds, to live in a world that I would want to live in? And what's crazy though, I look around and I see regulations coming in that are literally making illegal the things that I'm doing. MetaMask, as it is going to be illegal, it looks like. If not in Germany, in Europe, right? And it's not just MetaMask or, you know, GDPR, which was, you know, I love the privacy side of GDPR. Well, the FATF travel rule is going to kill GDPR. Every single blockchain transaction that goes on the chain has to have a name and address on it. So what's going on here, right? And overall, like, doesn't the government or governments want to fix this? Don't the governments want self-actualization for their people? Don't the governments want to solve climate change? Why are there sticks in the wheels towards things that can really, truly help? You know, 2 of the biggest levers we have right now that we haven't fully exploited are blockchain and AI. And by the way, AI, there's regulations now coming down the pipe also to put sticks in the wheels of AI. I might not have been able to drive Moore's Law with AI with these regulations. So I want to talk about now 2 things. What's going on? And then what are some tools just to get going? And I know others will follow up with this and we'll have discussions. So overall, what's going on? And to help explain this, I'll tell a story. In 2015, we were one of the first blockchain startups out there. So if you're one of the token blockchain entrepreneurs, you get invited to all these meetings. So I got invited to this meeting with about 15 central bankers from all over Europe. And it was me and these 15 central bankers and Andreas Antonopoulos. and a one-day workshop in, I forget where, Luxembourg or something. And at the beginning of the workshop, there was sort of this opening speech from one of the bankers, and they said, any questions? And so I raised my hand. Yes, Trent? Who here has a Bitcoin wallet or holds Bitcoin? Guess how many hands went up? It was, I raised my hand, and Andreas raised his hand, none others. So here was a group of central bankers starting to sit down and talk about how to regulate Bitcoin, and none of them had even touched Bitcoin. So imagine, it's sort of like, imagine the only time you've ever had exposure to cars is reading a children's book once 3 years ago about cars. And then you're told that you decide you have to regulate cars because you don't like how that little boy was treated in the car, right? And that's one way of framing. It's maybe a bit harsh, but things are getting better. There's more dialogue, but this was the state of 2015. Obviously, that's 7 years ago now. It's really important to keep engaging, right? So I've been engaging for a long time with governments about things like this. You know, I had the great luxury to iterate with Estonia on their e-residency program, as well as helping them to design some of their crypto laws. So that was a very positive experience, and they were really eager learners, and I really enjoyed that experience. And I've found myself iterating with other policymakers, et cetera, too. More recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of stuff around GaiaX, the European-wide initiative. 2 minutes, okay. I gotta get faster. Okay, so, but the key thing is, it's hard to understand tech if you're not a technologist, especially if there's no good explanation for non-technologists. And in the government, well, look at the demographics, there's not as many technologists. Okay, some tools. There are existing laws out there that can be useful. Web 1, Web 2. If I set up a server in the middle of nowhere, an internet server, without a domain name or anything, no one can stop me. It's just there because TCP/IP itself, the packets just flow, right? On top of that, though, if I set it up in, say, Germany, then there's the .de DNS servers, the NICs around that, and then there's Google search. So that's where it's sort of this two-part system. There's the super decentralized part at the bottom, and then there's the last mile within the jurisdictions, right? So this was the case for pre-web. This was the case for Web 1 and Web 2, and it's still the case for Web 3. That setup is still there. So in Web 3, what's interesting is instead of just packets flowing around, we now also have state at this lower level, right? So you can have state inside a blockchain that is jurisdiction-free, but there's still a last mile, of course, and that last mile has to follow the jurisdictions. Google search has to, wherever it is, has to follow the jurisdictions in whichever country, et cetera. Okay, that's a really useful tool. So we can leverage existing laws. You can start a DAO simply as a Delaware LLC. This is what Metacartel Ventures is. I'm a part of that, right? So there's a lot of existing tools and regulations that can be leveraged towards helping the people, et cetera. Sometimes you don't need more. There's other tools too that are really useful. This idea of wet code versus dry code from Nick Szabo, or you can call it powers versus rights, as Andre Cronje talked about. Instead of traditionally rights, just what powers does the technology give you? And Simon de Louvier has given a great example of that with CC0. So to start wrapping up then, at the beginning of this talk, I said, I laid out what is it that we're aiming for. And the summary is, at least for me, if humanity had an objective function, it would be self-actualization. That's the towards goal. And the away goal is simply avoid the crazy bad stuff, avoid the war, avoid the climate change that will decimate, you know, millions of lives and so on. And then let's find ways to leverage the tools to help us with these goals, and try to work with the governments such that they don't inadvertently put sticks in their wheels, because we're here to really change the world. So let's help work with each other to change the world together, and not have these sticks in our wheels. With that, thank you very much, everyone, and have a good day.
Hi, my name is Friederike Ernst. I'm the Gnosis COO. I also host a podcast named Epicenter. If I could just say +1 to everything that Trent said, I would do that. And I would give you guys more time to refuse food. I was going to start a different way, but with Trent being my previous speaker, last weekend my dad was here. So my dad is 66 years old, was his birthday. It's kind of towards the end of his professional career. He's still working. And basically, we had like a late night conversation on my balcony with a glass of wine. And I asked him, just as you do, what he recently changed his mind about. Like not little things, like fundamental things, right? Because so I had told him about a book that I was reading at the time. It's called Think Again. So basically about changing your mind, unsurprisingly. And I had spoken about Nord Stream and things like that. And he said the thing that kind of he recently realized how wrong he was about was way back in the 70s and 80s, when basically all of this climate change, and environmental pollution and acid rain sort of news first came out. And he remembered thinking, this is fantastic news, because now we know about this. Now we can do something about it. And thinking back on that, he said he felt it really surprised him how this hadn't turned out true, how basically we as humanity have known about the way that we're really fucking up this place good for a long time, and somehow we don't actually manage to do anything about this, despite the fact that this clearly is not going to end well for any one of us or our kids or our grandkids. I mean, we're headed in the wrong direction, right? So this is why I said +1 to everything that Trent said. And the question is, why is that? I mean, we have good information. Why don't we turn these into good policies? Why can't we? I mean, there are reports about how to stop climate change. And I mean, it costs money, sure, but I mean, it's not undoable. It's not inevitable yet. Somehow, but somehow we have really bad impulse control as humanity. And basically what I would posit is that this is actually caused by the fact that way too few people are actually in control of things. So basically if it kind of boils down to who actually gets to shape what the world will look like tomorrow and next year and the year after that, most of us don't really get a say. And I think that's tragic. I think that's horrible. And then when people kind of, and policymakers, they also turn it both ways, right? So basically, it's like the apathetic youth that doesn't talk, that doesn't care about politics and so on. But then when they start, like climate action, Fridays for Future, Last Generation, whatever, it's always like, those crazy kids, why aren't they in school? So yeah, so I totally, this is kind of where I'm coming from, and from the big picture. So I think what we fundamentally need to change with humanity is that we need better ways of coordinating. I'm not sure whether this will actually make it whole. Don't know whether this will work, but I think DAOs are actually one of the last straws that we have to grab at to kind of see whether we can actually, get humanity to coordinate on that larger scale, right? And then, as someone who kind of builds infrastructure for DAOs, I ask myself what kind of gets in the way. And this kind of leads me to the policy question, right? So basically, the policies, if you look at them, we always end up arguing about we always end up arguing about we end up arguing about nitty-gritty details. And I think what would help a lot is kind of to just zoom out, because I think the people who are in power and who are in the driver's seat, most of them are not badly intentioned. It's just easier to kind of not think about things thoroughly and kind of get the big picture. And I think we kind of need to get better at kind of forcing policymakers to think about the big picture. So basically not to talk about MiCA and travel rules and whatnot. I mean, yeah, that's horrible regulation, don't get me wrong, but I think kind of just coming from the other side and saying what's wrong today and what we need to be able to facilitate to make sure that we as humanity make it, or a sizable proportion of us make it. This is, I think, this isn't quite internalized with most of the people yet. So basically, my approach to kind of talking about regulation would be to kind of zoom out and then zoom out and zoom out a bit further and kind of stop talking about the nitty-gritty details. I mean, it's fine if people talk about this, but we need to talk about the big picture more. And this is kind of where I would kind of encourage you guys to ask questions about regulation. So the first one is, so basically my premise would be regulation has to do, so I'm not anti-regulation at all. So basically, but if you look at regulation, what it inherently should do is it should protect reasonable people who act in reasonable ways from consequences that they had no way of foreseeing, right? So basically, if you're at the zoo and say the lion enclosure has a door and the door is wide open, you could just think, this is not a real lion or whatever, you walk in, right? Obviously, the door to the lion cage should be locked. But should there be no lions in the zoo? Or should basically the lion be behind an electric fence or whatever? I mean, so basically, someone reasonable should be able to not put themselves in danger's way. This is the first one. The second one is regulation per se should not protect the status quo. It should not, by its design, protect the incumbents, right? So basically, so the second question, so first question is, who does it benefit? And is that a reasonable assumption that people would act this way? Secondly, who does it actually protect, right? So basically, the entire hosted wallet versus unhosted wallet. I mean, why is it okay for a bank to host a wallet? Why is it not okay for me to host my own wallet? I mean, this makes no sense. This is weird. So basically, kind of, yeah, who does this protect? And then kind of asking yourself, and the regulators who are in charge of this, these questions every single time. I think this will make a difference, I hope. And I hope we kind of, I'm the eternal optimist. And I mean, this is. I think we can kind of engineer our way out of almost everything, and we'll try. But I think kind of the public perception of what we're doing, why we're doing this really matters. And I think we're kind of. I mean, if you look at the media, the stories where the blockchain people are like the seedy bad guys, they're better stories. So kind of we need to make sure that we're heard and basically people understand why what we're building matters and how it can enable society to coordinate in ways that currently it cannot. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak here as well. I come here with a presentation that I didn't make, so just to make the other speakers feel better. This is a team presentation that we just did actually 2 days ago for the supporters of the European Crypto Initiative, which is a non-profit association based in Brussels, which is trying to fix this hot mess that Brussels is producing right now called markets and crypto assets. Yeah, I think it's better than its reputation maybe in some parts, but generally I think in the crypto space it hasn't been that well received. So I want to talk a little bit about what is the political consensus that has been reached, but also how has that political consensus been reached. I don't think we feel part of that consensus group, so to speak. So how did that actually happen? And yeah, also maybe reflect a little bit on what I heard both from Trent and from Friederike, who come, I think, as technologists into a space where suddenly regulators want to give you prescriptions on what you're allowed to do and what not allowed to do. So on June 30th, just a few days ago, there was this big political agreement being reached in Brussels between the three institutions that are essentially making laws in Europe happen. And this is the end of a 2-year process, essentially. The MiCA regulations were first released in 2020, and then there was a long, arduous process in refining, changing, adding, subtracting, and then putting it all together, hundreds of pages, essentially, of new rules that suddenly create an ontology, so to speak, on what crypto assets are, what kind of transactions exist in connection with them, what kind of services are typically provided, what are the risks that those services expose consumers, investors, and the financial system as a whole to, what kind of rules should be released to counteract that, and so on. And so, as someone who, just like Friederike and Trent, has been in crypto for so long, to me it was quite interesting to realize, wow, people in the European Commission and then the Council and the Parliament, had to sit down for like weeks and months on end and read and write a lot about crypto assets, right? Something they may never have done before, and suddenly they had to become experts in this field in order to produce this regulation. And the stuff that is still happening after this political agreement is that actually there's a kind of second level rulemaking happening where all those broad regulations that are now in existence around stablecoins and NFTs and ICOs and DEXs and SEXs and all those things, they are basically now turned into really much more concrete, even formulations of what is a decentralized stablecoin, and all those kinds of things. So that is still happening, and this will be actually where a lot of important decisions will be made. So it's not over. But then really it's just formal stuff. And by around 2024, the world will be much, much different than it is today. If you're a fledgling artist that wants to do an NFT drop, you have to talk to a lawyer first in order to understand whether this is now legal or not, and those kinds of things. So let's look at the key points that were agreed in MiCA. NFTs are to some extent excluded from the regulation, but that's only the case for absolutely unique and non-fractionable NFTs. And now you may wonder, what is a truly unique NFT? Well, nobody knows, right? So NBA Top Shots are not unique, for example. So NBA Top Shots would be a financial instrument in Europe going forward, for example, right? So what is truly unique? Nobody knows. Stablecoins have been kind of the most intensely regulated in MiCA because actually Facebook's move in 2019 or 18 at the time to introduce Libra was actually the reason why all of this was ever started by the EU. It was only about Facebook in the beginning and making sure that they cannot endanger the Eurozone, but then this grew into much more comprehensive regulation. There is now a daily transaction limit of 200 million euros for basically asset referenced stablecoins, so certain kinds of stablecoins, to be under a certain, legality threshold. And if you're above it, you're significant, you need special permissions to even operate in the market. Now, if you look at transaction volumes, they may be a bit low now due to the bear market, but we all know that significant stablecoins today, like USDC and so on, they already have much more significant volumes. There's now also a blacklist of non-compliant crypto asset service providers. Now you may be wondering what a crypto asset service provider is. That is basically potentially everybody who considers themselves a builder, right? And this blacklist could actually be the start of some really strong enforcement actions against, DAOs running decentralized exchanges or all those kinds of things. So this is something that we're quite afraid of. Some other highlights is that now the European Banking Authority is having the jurisdiction or regulatory oversight over asset-referenced tokens. So, for example, if Maker would be considered not decentralized enough to be outside of the scope of MiCA, they would be regulated by the European Banking Authority, for example, because they are issuing an ART, most likely. There is now also, and that was a strong wish of the parliament, that regulatory, environmental regulatory safeguards are being introduced. So there is now a classification scheme for crypto assets to be basically non-sustainable. And that has the consequence that, well, right now no consequence, but later on it can mean that, maybe you have a different tax burden if you're trading non-sustainable assets, or if you're a CASP that is custodying non-sustainable assets, maybe there is some special regulation. So they've created the foundation to distinguish between coins that run on a proof of work blockchain versus on a proof of stake blockchain. So the fork has been prepared. It's just, there are just no consequences yet attached to it. This quite technical slide here really just explains how this second level rulemaking is going to happen, where ESMA is going to now write all those technical details on what those provisions mean that I just talked about. And then some other highlights is that exchanges, centralized exchanges, obviously are now liable for losses when those losses would have been preventable by better security measures, for example. Also interesting is that tokens without issuers, such as Bitcoin, need to have a white paper written by the exchanges that want to list them for trading. And then this white paper needs to describe the coin and then be compliant with the stipulations of what parameters coins need to fulfill in order to be allowed to be listed on centralized exchanges. So centralized exchanges are becoming kind of this gatekeeper between the decentralized and the centralized crypto asset world, so to speak. Yeah, that's kind of the exchanges part. I think before I'm going to go even more into technical details, I have 2 minutes left. I maybe just want to make some general remarks on how it was like for me to be part of those 2 years of making this regulation. We started actually in late 2020 with a 1 or 2 hour workshop for members of parliament in Europe, explaining them DeFi, NFTs, and all those, exciting new decentralized paradigms that allow us to build a more inclusive financial system, but also non-financial applications around, decentralized identities and so on. And we had over 100 members of parliament continuously be part of this workshop for an hour and a half. They asked a lot of questions. We had many follow-ups afterwards, and there was a clear, sign of gratitude for being given that information and for providing it in a way that is, also inspiring to those people. They are not robots. They found all of this stuff interesting that we were telling them. And this was a very good start that we did. And then we followed up with talking to the commission. And in the commission, I can tell you, the people in the commission, I would say they like crypto even, at least the real nerds, because a nerd, I think for a person that is, technically inclined, it's hard not to like crypto because it's so interesting as a technology in of itself and the markets it's created. So I would say even in the commission, there's nobody that doesn't really like crypto, but of course they follow the rules of the institution they are in order to then, shape something. But then it became a really, really complex and more hostile process, I would say, as it moved on into the other institutions, which is the council, number one, which is the most important organ in Europe when it comes to regulation. And they just represent national interests. And then you have national interests that are like, for example, well, oversight of crypto assets should definitely stay at the national level. We don't want to give up regulatory oversight to some European authority, right? So suddenly you have just the national interest competing again. And then the parliament, which, in my view, has always been this institution that represents the will of the people, like the populace, against the bureaucrats, actually was the organ that, or the institution that was responsible for almost banning crypto wallets completely, like making MetaMask illegal, responsible for almost making proof of work completely illegal, and other things. So it's actually the parliament, which is the popular vote in a sense in Europe, that is jeopardizing the future of crypto in Europe, and with it potentially survival of humankind, if we believe that DAOs are in fact our last straw to create those global coordination mechanisms. So this leads me to the conclusion that one point to start to change all of this is to talk even more to members of parliament and to talk to the people who vote for them in order to create the understanding that's obviously lacking for why we need this technology. And now I'm looking forward to the discussions. Thank you very much.
That have names next to it. Now you said that this didn't enter into the MiCA regulation. What's the actual policy now?
Yeah, so the consensus on TFR is that peer-to-peer unhosted wallet transactions do not need any form of identification attached without any thresholds. So you can still transact $1 billion peer-to-peer and on Bitcoin going forward. But you, if you send more than $1,000 from an unhosted wallet to a hosted wallet, meaning a wallet where the custodian is a crypto asset service provider, then this crypto asset service provider needs to force the recipient of that money to disclose the identity of the person that controls this unhosted wallet who sent the money. So there's an unhosted to hosted regulatory.
Can I ask a question regarding that? Because, so basically, if I ask someone to send me $1 billion that I want to cash out through Coinbase, and I ask them to send that money to my own unhosted wallet, I mean, do I misunderstand? And then basically from my own unhosted wallet, I can send it to the exchange.
To Coinbase?
And then obviously, I mean, I can say this is my wallet. So do I misunderstand the regulation, or is this just not thought out?
So what the regulation now says is that if someone sends you from an unhosted wallet to your unhosted wallet, some amount of money, whatever it is, that does not require you to identify them or them to identify you. However, if you then want to cash out that money and you move it onto a centralized exchange to convert it into euros, then this centralized exchange has to ask you, hey, where is that money coming from, this unhosted wallet that is now moving that money onto this account? Is that really you? And then they have to basically KYC that unhosted wallet and make sure that you are the one controlling it. And obviously for this, there is no reasonable procedure or standard yet to do it, but this is the requirement now.
I mean, they can ask me to sign an arbitrary message from then on, but I mean, if it's that easy to kind of sidestep, does it make sense?
So my personal opinion is that AML regulation today is vastly inefficient at reaching its goal, while being extremely costly in terms of excluding a lot of people from having any chance of being part of the financial system. So if you ask me personally, I think it's not a good policy from the get-go. I think it's a better policy though than the one that was floated by the parliament, which was that even peer-to-peer transactions would have to follow stringent KYC requirements.
But the other thing is, so basically regulation only works if you can enforce it, right? So basically if you have unenforceable regulation, that kind of, it just makes you look extremely weak and or stupid. So,
I would agree, yeah.
Related to your question, Julian, and your answer on the having to have the information attached to the transaction, that generally wasn't going through MiCA anyway. It was going through the FATF travel rule,
Exactly.
right? So this could still come. It just won't be via the MiCA regulations, or
no. So the AML CFT implementation of this travel rule was always outside of MiCA in this special case law, and they reached a political consensus on this one at the same day as MiCA.
Okay.
So it just is coincidentally now both kind of closed.
Okay.
And the TFR for now does not contain this most horrible variant.
Right. Okay.
So it's less bad than.
I have a question. Maybe you can answer. Maybe anyone here. How the heck did the crypto community let the policymakers choose the labels hosted wallet and unhosted wallet? Like, that's such a load of shit, to be precise. Like, it's wallet and bank account.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
But no, like, how do we let them do that? It's, I don't know, like, it's a genuine question, actually, right? Like,
so I can say that this terminology was invented in the forum of the Financial Action Task Force,
okay.
which is a non-democratically elected,
Yeah.
no oversight,
right.
voluntary meeting of important states
Yeah.
who then agree on rules,
Yeah.
which then incidentally all the governments that they were sent from implement voluntarily also,
Yeah.
and now everybody in the world is following those same stringent rules.
Right.
That's this weird institution of the FATF.
Right.
And as long as we have no lever of changing that whole thing,
Mhm.
we will not be able to control that antagonistic language
Right.
that is breeding in there. It's
Yeah.
like where it's being.
Yeah, because that's it. But so is it? But when it hits the EU, can you just not identify it as antagonistic and then say this is antagonistic? It's making it sound like hosted wallets are a good thing, like bank accounts are a good thing, and self-sovereign wallets are a bad thing, right? And we've seen, for example, with like all the recent stuff with BlockFi and Celsius, exactly the problem is where you've got centralized happening, right?
Yeah.
So you've got regulations basically encouraging the bad shit.
Yeah, this is the bizarre thing.
Yeah.
And I remember since I'm in crypto, people told me, move your crypto off exchanges.
Yeah.
Never custody
Yeah.
on the exchanges. In Europe, this is something we literally have to stop saying almost, right?
Yeah.
So this is crazy.
But I don't understand, like, why are they putting sticks in the wheels? Like, to Frederica's questions, like, who is this actually helping? And it seems to me that it's helping exactly the incumbents, and it's actually not helping the people. So,
So
We have two
okay.
folks
Yes.
in the audience.
I'll stop.
who would like to
Yeah.
I think he.
Actually, I just have a question because you were in Brussels when they made the decision on banning proof of work, however they wanted to enforce it, which comes with Frederica's opinion as well. They would have said yes if there was any chance to really ban it, but they couldn't, so they needed to vote for no, or am I seeing it the wrong way? Because there was a debate in the EU Parliament, I remember, that they wanted to ban proof of work because it was so energy consuming on Bitcoin. And they all voted, or majorly voted no, except it goes against their views. So I'm a little bit confused now. At one point they want to make it more energy efficient or whatsoever, but then they don't do it because my personal opinion is, that they couldn't enforce it. So they would rather say, no, we don't do it because we don't have any idea on how to do it.
So the enforcement for something like this would be quite simple in their mind, which is centralized exchanges in Europe and other centralized service providers just cannot do any dealings with that asset, right? So it's like a shadow ban from the trusted venues where average consumers would go. Advanced people like you would be, in a sense, unaffected. So that's how they would.
So no new income or new influx of money actually, or crypto, because basically for everyone average it will be way too high.
I think this is this kind of horrible scenario we're now looking at, where there are forces in society which are, represented in Europe in the institutions, but they are not only there, where their plan is to make crypto kind of a shadow economy that has no chance at really being fully interoperable or superseding current systems. And I think this is something we have to take very serious.
I'm taking it super serious.
Yeah.
That's exactly my point, where I think forward-looking, they block innovation because what they actually ban is decentralized business models. And actually this banning decentralized business models kind of killing most likely 99% of the disruption potential blockchain technology has. So just calling it DLT and hosted wallets exactly reflects again that they just do not understand the technology and the possibilities it brings.
All the money.
Yeah.
What I think one important remark I do want to make that I maybe didn't make so clearly before is we tend to talk about regulators as like one uniform block of meat, but in reality it's very, very differentiated. And for example, we found in one of the highest echelons of the institutions, we found one of the longest standing parliamentarians in this whole parliament. She's a trusted authority across any political spectrum. And when we told her about stablecoins and what Europe is doing with it and how it's quite the exact opposite of what they should be doing, she was like, wow, I have never been exposed to this information. I did not know any of this. If this is true, this is crazy, blah, blah, blah. I need to research this. And it's like, so the institution versus the individual. And you have a lot of great people in the institutions in Europe, but and that's maybe another remark I want to say, something that fundamentally lacks to me in how we do regulation is this concept of error correction, right? This idea of assuming the regulation we do right now is probably bad, and we will only realize it once it's out there, creating damage, and then we have the methods in place to see the damage early and iterate and iterate and iterate. And I think, this is how Facebook does every single update to their user interface. They just test a million times if it converts. And I'm wondering, why don't governments also test policies in a way where they check, okay, does this convert the people into doing the thing that I want them to do? In the end, it's the same thing, but governments don't have this approach.
We actually have it in cities with, they do tests with flows of traffic for like 1 week. It's actually a very cool thing. So there are some governments that have it, right? Because they'll just try out a traffic policy for a week or a month in a place, and if it works, then make it permanent. But so that's maybe a starting point for governments.
Yeah, I think so too. And giving an expiry date to laws is such a simple method also.
Not a lot.
Yeah.
Because they're too afraid to then put the decisions back.
Yeah.
I think we had one more question too before, and then we'll. Okay. We have a few more questions, but maybe we'll just.
Announcements. We'll do one.
Okay, one more, and you.
Oh, okay, that's probably the worst question. Because I had a basic understanding question. I'm not so deep into the MiCA, but from my understanding, if we are asking for regulation on the one hand, what is the most effective way for a government or any authority to enforce regulation and prevent what you said, that someone goes into the lion cage accidentally? If we not have the concept of hosted wallets, because the moment when we're talking about monetary, like cryptocurrencies, as opposed to coins or tokens in the wider sense, the moment where currency or any monetary value leaves the system and comes from the digital into the real world, that's where the regulation has a handle to actually enforce anything, right? And for that, KYC in particular is extremely important, because only if the police can grab you in the real world, that's when you really have to fear something, right? That's when you can actually enforce something. So in what sense is a hosted wallet definition, if you have an unhosted wallet, for all transactions that remain in the digital space, is a bad solution to the question or the ask or the demand for regulation? On surface value, it seems to make a lot of sense. So there's probably something I haven't understood then, or?
So I think what we complain about is, first of all, the naming nomenclature. So hosted versus unhosted, it sounds hosted is the better or more natural one to the ear, psychologically, at least. That's what I think. There's a framing a little bit in it. And of course, you can provide wallets in a way where I custody your key or you do it yourself. And there's a great benefit in having someone reliable custody it for you, right? Obviously. But I think this is where governments fall short, is they refuse now since a decade to, start looking at ways to do things differently, but achieving even a better, risk mitigation result in the end. And I think this to me is what crypto is about. If we go from this idea of everything is always custodied and intermediated to it's self-custodied, but we recreate security guarantees through multi-signature schemes, through social recovery schemes, through, community validated, addresses, and there are so many things you can do if you start thinking natively in this new medium of crypto and blockchain, that very quickly you would, I think, arrive at a point where you say, wow, I'm glad we didn't try to transport those old policies into this new world because they are inefficient and break down super quickly. I'm glad we did it natively. And I think this is where governments go, and I just don't understand what we need to push them there. All I'm doing since a decade now is talk to them and always find individuals who seem to understand, but institutionally I feel we're falling behind. That's my current assessment.
I would also turn the question around. So what do you think the people who are in front of their computers, what do you think they need to be protected from, right? I think this is kind of the question that one should start with, and then kind of work from there.
Well, I mean, I can't answer the question of what people need to be protected from, because I think at the end of the day that's an individual decision, and there's just a common, like a critical mass of people that would probably name a few things. For starters, you could say scams and these kind of things, or money laundering as a general thing. And there I would see an advantage of having a regulation that at least gets a handle on preventing that, right?
But scams and money laundering, they are already illegal. I mean, you don't need new regulation for that, right? So basically you have laws in place that would allow you to prosecute people who launder money or scam people, right?
Right, but illegality doesn't protect immediately. Just because something is illegal doesn't mean you're protected by it.
Yeah, but this
right?
is,
if
this
there's
is
no
the
way
same
to
for
enforce
everything,
any law.
right? I mean, basically, I could pick up, oh, those are all wooden knives, maybe
Right.
to protect you guys. But I mean, I could, in principle, I could physically attack you. I mean, I was told earlier that we look aggressive standings. So I mean, in principle, people are free to do all kinds of bad shit, and what we do is kind of we deal with it as a society by kind of prosecuting them for this, right? So
Right, but if there is no KYC, how are we going to prosecute the digital intent?
You have to educate them already in the earlier process.
If someone just scams you, yeah, and we had this like 4 or 5 years ago, and we finally found the person who hacked the first DAO. Yeah, and this was just by accident because there was some central exchange that KYC'd that person. There should be consequences, I'm sorry. Yeah, and now we know who that is, and there should be consequences. And maybe also on the KYC side, unpopular opinion here, but maybe that's a chance for us, because talking about governance, we are doing DAOs and we pretend like token voting is the best thing. That's super feudalistic, right? And then we get a slap in the face, not by the experts, but by the parliament, the people, right? That they look at us and they're like, you guys are full of shit, and they regulate us. So maybe we should also look at ourselves to see what did we do wrong and how could we do that better, because like in general, living in a society where like bad actions have consequences, I'm all for that.
can I answer that, because I think that's
Really quickly, yeah.
And then we're gonna hop in.
Yeah.
so the thing is, yeah. So I'm totally with you that coin voting is probably not the best way of governance, and I think it kind of goes to show how early we are in the entire DAO space. So I think like this is DAO's, this is the internet pre-browser. So basically things are gonna change from here, and basically what DAOs give us is this arena of experimentation and kind of trying things out. And yes, absolutely. So basically humans have tried to coordinate on somewhat large scales for the last, say, 50 to 200,000 years, depending on which anthropologists you ask. And yeah, so basically, obviously, you kind of have to iterate over different designs, and what DAOs do is they give you the design space to kind of try all of these out in parallel, and kind of let the system itself figure out what works, right? Because, I mean, so basically, some sort of if you think about kind of how we're governed today, most of us are governed by a representative democracy. Yeah? So basically, you kind of vote for one person or two people or however your country is set up, and they kind of represent you on everything. And then you have countries where you have direct democracy, which is, also you have low voter turnout, and you kind of have like somewhere in between where you can delegate your vote on certain things, and the liquid democracy kind of crowd. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen for DAOs. I think basically coin voting, this is not the be all and end all, and no one says it is, right?
So with that tasty ending point for us to all chew on.
Let's give them a round of applause
Yes.
quickly. Yeah, and then we're going to break up into groups of 2. But first...
2 groups, not groups.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, good catch.